Hello, everyone. It's Jennie and Laurie of Astropath, and today we're here to talk about the Aries season. So we're coming into spring, we're coming to the spring equinox, and all things Aries season. So before we get into talking about that, let me just introduce us. Jennie is of Hidden Path Astrology. You can find her at hiddenpathastrology.com. You can go on there and sign up for her blog to be delivered to you. You can also hire her for consultations, for teaching. There is another thing I want to mention, that both of us have separate playlists for our individual videos here on YouTube. So you also want to make sure, whether you check them out on her website or on YouTube, to check out her meditation videos or recordings, which she does every season as well. So myself, I'm Laurie. You can find me at lauriefarrington.com. And I also offer mentoring, consultations, and you can find both of us on social media. There'll be links below, anything you want to find. But before we jump into all of this, please subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. It really helps us. Leave us comments. We'll do our best to reply, and yeah, send these to your friends as well. So thanks, and we'll dive right in, I think. You ready, Jennie?
Sounds good.
Okay.
All right. Well, we're talking about Aries season. It happens on March 19th. It goes in at 11:06 p.m. This is Eastern Daylight Time. So make sure you adjust for your own time zone, because it could be on a different day for you, depending where you're located. But anyway, that's what we're talking about. And it's also the spring equinox. What does that mean?
What does that mean? That means the sun is moving into Aries. It means that we are at that pivot point where we are moving into spring. Each season has 3 signs involved. And with spring, it is the Aries, Taurus, and Gemini. So Aries is the first of the spring signs, and it's ruled, yeah, Aries is ruled by Mars. It's a very invigorating time of the year.
Yeah, you can think of it as well, in the Northern Hemisphere. This is how I can think of it. This is the time of year where the sun is starting to get warmer and warmer, and now the equinox means the sun is directly over the equator. And it's moving north, so it's the sign of like, hey, the earth is starting to warm up, and that's cueing all of the little seeds and all of the things that are beneath the surface there to start, waking up. That's what Aries season symbolizes, and it's definitely based on that in the astrology, the Western astrology that Laurie and I do, based on the tropical zodiac. So anyway, that's basically what we're looking at. And Aries, you're right, it's all those things where things are getting started. Aries is the first sign of the zodiac, so it's kicking everything off. It's like, I guess it's kind of like the Big Bang theory of the zodiac. It's like this ignition point. And usually that's what we'd be talking about. But this Aries season is a little bit different.
Yeah, it is. It's a very interesting Aries season, isn't it?
Yeah, it's not what you think.
So yeah, before we open up the chart, Aries, we want to just say also the Aries is cardinal. It is fire. It's ruled by Mars. So that kind of gives you the whole feel of it. And another thing I wanted to say here is a lot of people do videos and talk about astrology month by month. And in case you haven't understood how Jennie and I do it, we do it each time the sun moves into a new sign. So we break it up, and that's why we call it seasons, because it is Aries season, not the month. I just felt the need to say that for some reason.
No, it's good, because we kind of just launch in, and
Yeah.
we've chosen deliberately to do it this way. And I don't know, my personal agenda, should I have one, is just that this is the natural cycle of things. And something I care about is having people kind of tune into these natural cycles, because even though in our modern world we don't pay as much attention. Well, for thousands and thousands of years we did, and we evolved in the natural cycles of the relationship of the moon and the sun. And so this is a little bit of an opportunity to return to that. That's what I end up thinking about. And that we break the season down by the moon phases, because the moon is the original calendar. It's the original daily calendar. And, you know, I mean, living here in a cloudy place, I don't get to see the light changing as much in the moon, but it is changing. So I'm glad you kind of mentioned that, because it's true. And that's why I think it's important.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting to do it this way when in our culture, we're so used to looking at the calendar. And, you know, we think of the beginning of this month and the beginning of that month. But if we really think about it from the perspective of the natural cycles, it's different. It does not line up with the calendar. So that's why we do it that way. And when the sun moves into Aries, that is, I mean, it is the beginning of the zodiac. It is a very dynamic point.
Yeah.
The Aries point is a very dynamic point.
And I mean, just like on a psychological level, like just as far as Aries traits, you know, I mean, Aries is has that very spontaneous type of energy. It's immediate. It's like, let's do this now. Aries is not going to be the energy that stops to pause to think about consequences. It's just very much like, let's get this going. Let's get it started. Let's go, go, go. And I think, yeah, there's a lot more to Aries. I mean, you kind of take it for granted in a way. It's just, oh, it's just Aries energy, but there's a lot more to it. And this particular Aries season is going to reveal more of, I don't know, some of there is an introspective part of Aries that normally you never think about it that way, but we're going to be asked to think about it this way during this Aries season. But in a nutshell, Aries is about the development of courage. And it's about the ability to be autonomous, to stand tall in your own shoes, to move forwards in an independent direction. And it's bold. But I also think there's a little bit of a misunderstanding of what courage is, like when you need it, when is it, how is it being used? And again, we'll talk more about that as we talk about the season. But
yeah, a lot of how that energy is perceived is very cultural. And yeah, we'll talk about that. Okay, are we ready to open the chart itself?
Awesome, let's do it.
Okay. Here we have the chart of the moment that the sun enters Aries. So there we can see where it is right over here, 0 degrees Aries.
So what's interesting about this is right away you get to see, well, what else is in Aries? Well, we have the North Node in Aries. That's the little symbol at 15 degrees there right next to the sun. That's how we know that we've got some eclipses that we're going to talk about. So is that, and then Mercury, interestingly, in Aries, going to retrograde this season. And then you have Chiron there. So I don't know, this is kind of what builds our Aries picture for this season, because you have what these three symbols represent. I mean, in a nutshell, the node is saying, hey, there's an eclipse here. Mercury's like, well, I'm forwards, but I'm going to be going backwards soon. So that brings in that more introspective piece that I briefly mentioned. And then Chiron is something about a wound. It's about a wound that must be contended with, that must be dealt with. Yeah, there's a lot we could probably say about the Chiron business there, but everyone sort of knows it as the wounded healer. So it's the idea that you have to kind of heal a wound in order to be healed so that you can then help other people heal with something similar. It's a cultural myth, I think, that is tied in here. Like, it's not just about you very personally, your wounds. There's a cultural wound here that is coming into play. Yes. So,
and yeah. I guess I just wanted to add a little more about Chiron, because Chiron it's so fascinating. And if you really dig into the myth of Chiron, it's really about an unhealable wound. We work on it, we develop a relationship with it, but we can't really expect the wound of Chiron to be healed. And I'll tell you, I argued in my own head with that for so long. But if you think about it, there are wounds that can never be healed. There, you know, you lose a child, you lose your right arm, those wounds don't heal. what we can do with those wounds is to accept them, to befriend them, and to learn how to use what we learn in there to be of healing capacity for others.
Well, you know, I'm glad you actually mentioned that, because I do think there's some misunderstanding about what it means to heal, you know, and to heal, I mean,
Yes.
because there's a linear nature to life. You're born, you go through life, you die. That's linear nature. But within that linear fact or truth, there's all sorts of cycles. There's all sorts of, you know, comings and goings. There's ways that you rotate through issues and they come back again. And so, I mean, I think the idea of healing is not that you're all fixed and everything's better and the same as it was beforehand. That's not it at all. I think it's more what you said, like the idea that you reckon, whoa, I lost my arm. And then you've learned to live life in a new way in which you feel spiritually or mentally, or however you want to put it, whole again. But you still have the fact of whatever the issue is, the initial wound that was there. And I think it's interesting because I don't feel like I feel a little limited with the English language in talking about some of these topics. Like it kind of, I don't know, it's easy to feel like you're spinning out into like woo-wooville, or, you know, or kind of judge it in some way. But I think that there's a misunderstanding about what it means to heal. And you're right, like you don't just check the box and you're done and everything's all perfect again. I mean, you have scars on your body that say otherwise, right? Like the scar is left. So yeah, good topic.
Yeah, it really is. So another thing that I want to point out with this moment of the sun entering Aries, you know, one of the things that we have to notice is that as it enters Aries, it's squaring that Pluto that we've talked so much about moving into
Sextile.
Aquarius. So it does kind of highlight the importance of paying attention to contemplating what that's about as well, right?
Yeah. That's a sextile though, not a square. It's
Oh, I'm
an
sorry.
opportunity. Yeah, no, it's okay. I just,
Yeah,
clarity's
yeah,
sake, like yeah, because we went through the square
yes,
before. We'll
yes,
go through it again. Don't worry.
yes, yes.
Or
There's
the
that.
conjunction.
And then it's also, like you pointed out, it also,
Hmm.
what's that? Yeah, it goes, the moon goes in right at almost the same time too. The moon goes into Leo, which is a trine aspect to that. So that's really interesting. I apologize for saying it was a square. It's clearly a sextile. So this is a very positive connection that the sun is making to the emotions of that day, to this intensity of change that's happening in our lives wherever Aquarius is. It's an interesting little pattern there.
It's been fun. You're right. Like I love those patterns of the sun and the moon moving into the same element. And we've had that pattern for the last couple of months. And maybe beyond. But I like that because also I want to mention too, even though there's a lot of difficulty with this Aries energy and season in some ways, but I also just want to touch on, like, fire is such a wonderful energy, and it really is the spark and the spirit of things, you know. And I definitely see things where it is also helpful to turn up that energy sometimes. Like sometimes it's helpful to turn up the heat and get into like
Mm.
humor and to be lighter hearted with things, and just remember that the fire is bringing the light. Because it's also, I feel like I've been focusing more on how fire can burn lately, and that the other side of it is how important fire is, that a lot of us need to actually turn up our own individual fire so that we can step more into you know, our purpose or the different things that we're doing in our lives. So love it.
Love it.
Mhm.
Okay.
The other things that Laurie and I talked a lot about extensively before this, was just there's still a lot going on in Pisces in this chart. And in fact, you don't even see Mars isn't even in Pisces yet, which is crucial to this season. The idea that we're not out of Pisces season. I mean, the sun is not in Pisces anymore, but we still have a lot going on there. We still have Venus, which needs to go all the way through, and then Mars as well. And Mars is the ruling planet of all that Aries. So there's a you can't escape the Pisces. And we talked a lot about in Pisces season an opportunity to rest and recuperate. And that is going to be extra important for the season that you've done the rest and recuperation, that Pisces season. And that work's going to continue even though we're moving forwards into Aries.
Yeah, this is a very interesting season with all these dynamics. But we'll get into that. Do we want to move to the calendar itself or the,
Sure.
yeah. Okay,
I think
let
we've covered all the
me,
main bits.
yeah, I think so. Okay, so here, whoops, whoa. Can't seem to get it on the right place here. Okay, so now thinking about this week by week, and again, we're not going by the calendar, we're going by the moon phases. So that's important to understand that that's how we're doing this. So we're going to start at the sun entering Aries, and we're going to think about the first days until we go through that eclipse that happens on March 25th at 5 degrees of Libra.
Yes, this first little segment of time. And what do you think, Laurie? What's your...
Well, I think it's really interesting because first the sun moves into Aries and it's all, ready to go. It's really ready to go. It's got that sextile to Pluto that we mentioned briefly. So that's like, it's sort of like the energy of Pluto is driving it forward or, giving it that little boost that sextiles do. And then also on the 21st, Venus hits a wall. Venus still in Pisces hits a restrictive wall, somehow is kind of pulled up short. You've got to contend with something serious here. Right after that, Mars going into Pisces. Well, before we do that, what do you have to say about that Venus conjuncting Saturn? You have anything about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting moment. I mean, Saturn certainly can represent, accountability or responsibility, some sort of serious encounter. And, connecting to Venus is kind of like there's something about having to check in with your values. Like I think of Venus represents a bunch of different things, but I think to me, its most core meaning for us individually is getting in touch with your value system. And so there's some way in which the values, I don't know, I feel like it's a question around, are you valuing other people's sensitivities enough? Are you paying enough attention to other people's suffering? Are you, are you trying to be empathetic? Are you trying to walk in another person's shoes? I mean, there's like and then it's an opportunity for a new cycle to begin around those topics. That's how I think of it. I mean, I'm a wellness astrologer. I'm thinking a lot about how this lands personally. And that's essentially, that is a skill to learn. It isn't something that you just walk into this world with. So I think there's something about that.
Yeah, I like how you talked about that and thinking about Venus as our values and also as the ways in which we connect with others. And with this being in Pisces, it is like it's really, to me, I feel like it's pointing to the importance of really imbuing our values with that serious level of compassion or bringing that serious level of sensitivity and compassion to our connection with others. And yeah, conjunctions between two planets are always the beginning of a cycle. So this is a time, you can think of it sort of like a new moon, time to plant a seed, to bring more serious accountability to yourself in your partnerships or in really bringing clarity to your values.
Yeah, I mean, I also was thinking, a conjunction, I'm thinking even in this case, is a little bit of a confrontation. It's a little bit of like, whoa, I need to do something a little bit differently with how I'm handling my relationships, perhaps. And there is something about that. And if you, I mean, Saturn and Venus have somewhat of an affinity for each other because Saturn is exalted in Libra, which is Venus's sign. So there's a little bit of like, it's not terrible. It's not like a really bad aspect. It's actually could be a very supportive aspect. So in other words, you're creating more stability in your relationships by being more empathetic. And the confrontation is about, having to develop a deeper level of that empathy than maybe you've been able to before. But the result is a new level of maturity, a new level of solidity and stability in the relationship in question. And of course, this depends on where it lands in your personal chart. If you're landing on something, a personal point at 12 degrees of Pisces or thereabouts, this is going to be much more impactful than for other people who don't have that sensitive spot quite so prevalent. So
absolutely, that's great. Yeah, it's a time to really look at your own level of empathy and compassion toward others, for sure. And then the next day on March 22nd, we've got Mars, which rules Aries. So this is really important to pay attention to this. When Mars steps into Pisces on March 22nd, the whole storyline of Aries season changes into something very different. We're no longer the warrior just blasting into battle. We have to contend with the sensitivity of that warrior. The fact that that warrior may have been very damaged by a battle. There's a lot to think about with that. Mars is not real happy to be in Pisces. It's just Mars wants to be in Aries or another fire sign where it can just blast forward without paying attention to consequences. But Pisces is really determined to determined for us to see the deeper levels underneath that are occurring in the collective, really.
Yeah. I like how you said it's like the warrior has sustained some damage and kind of is in this and is in need of healing. And it's also the flip side of that is that the warrior has caused damage and now needs to face the damage the warrior has caused. And that's some of that misunderstanding of courage that I mentioned before. There is a huge amount of courage it takes to face the damage you have done to other people and then to sort of accept, oh my God, and then to also have compassion for yourself in that moment. So there's something very, and you're right, like Mars is like, no thanks, I'm just gonna gallop right over this sign, I don't feel like it. But it's really important, and this is part of why the flavor of the season is more inward than you might expect for an Aries season. It really kind of brings that to forefront and with some of the other things. But anyway, that's interesting little piece there.
That is. And then, I don't think we need to go over every detail here, do we, or do we?
No, let's jump. I think it's going to come out because then we have our lunar eclipse. So now we're in eclipse season. Our eclipse issues right now are Libra and Aries. So this is a lunar eclipse. The moon will be at 5 degrees of Libra. And I think it's interesting that conversation we just had about Venus being in conjunction with Saturn and what that is. Well, this is a Libra eclipse. So you're being asked to look at Venus issues. So back to those values, back to that place where, Libra does suggest a lot about having dependence in relationships or just somehow being, like trying to be too nice or ingratiating yourself. So, and I'm saying this because it's a south node eclipse, meaning the moon is going to be near the south node for this. And so there's some way in which we're all you have to each look at, wait, where do I give myself away too much? Or am I trying to please some other thing rather than doing what's authentic? Those are some of the questions that are going to come up during that Libra season. So that kind of ties into that earlier conjunction.
Yeah, the whole because the eclipse season is happening right here in Aries season, that whole polarity between Libra and Aries is really important to pay attention to. If you've got your own chart in hand, look at what houses Aries and Libra fall into, and understanding that area where this lunar eclipse is happening in Libra is an area where you are being asked at this time to release some sort of dependency in that area. And that's, this eclipse really kind of points at that. It's a pivotal moment. Eclipses are always pivotal moments for change. So really understanding what it is, where your kind of dependencies might be in that area of your life.
Mm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I remember talking about that at length in the Libra season video
Yeah,
ago.
that's
So
where we talked about it. I know we talked about it at length in one of the videos.
those
Yeah,
more.
it's a really important thing to be paying attention to.
Yeah, so that's a pretty heavy hitting first week. That kind of sets up the tone because the next week, there's not a whole lot going on the next week according to the moon phases, you know. So now, so remember, we just had the lunar eclipse and it's a full moon. So now we're on the waning side of the moon cycle. So we're starting to kind of, you know, release some of the things about this cycle. And I think the biggest thing here is to Mercury.
Yeah,
It goes retrograde. I mean, here we are. It's trying to get out of Aries and whoops,
yeah,
it's not going to be able to. And so it retrogrades at 27
yeah.
degrees. Um, mhm.
I just think it's really, really important in my mind that it gets almost all the way through Aries. And then it's like it gets pulled back like, you're not ready to move into Taurus. You have got to really backtrack and pay attention to how you've been using the energy of Aries.
Yeah. And with Mercury, it's like this is a mindset. You know, this is
Right.
your how your mentality's involved. You know, like how your mind just kind of follows along with, I don't know, the popular culture, let's say, the popular way of thinking about Aries and what the meaning of courage is. And then this is an opportunity to be like, is that authentic for me? Do I buy into that? Do I have a different view? What does it mean to have courage? I mean, I think it gives that, which I like. I like how Mercury brings in the if you use it well, it kind of brings in a little bit of separation where you let your mind kind of play with some topics while
Hmm.
recognizing that's not your whole self. You know, it's
Mhm.
just your mind playing with topics and investigating this.
I love that just the way you said that. I really like that. Talking to people regularly, if you look at, the sun and Mercury don't ever get very far away from each other.
Mhm.
And the closer they are in a person's natal chart, the more challenging it is for people to really see the fact that their thinking is not who they are.
Yeah, exactly.
If
I
you've
agree.
got
Yeah.
your sun and Mercury really close, it's really hard for you to separate. Oh, this is me and this is how I think, and they aren't one and the same. And yeah, it's an interesting thing to think about.
Yeah. And then, you know, that week, you know, it brings us all the way up to the last quarter square. So that's the moon in Capricorn. We're releasing the cycle to something to let go of, something that regards, I don't know, your bossiness. I think Capricorn's like the boss, the CEO, but it's also your integrity. So maybe it's having to release something that's standing in the way of you having integrity. Like you have to release some false belief or something, you know, that could be part of the fact it's happening on April Fool's Day and the
Oh,
same thing with Mercury retrogrades. It's like, and just yeah, allowing yourself. I think it's important to think about that. Allowing yourself to have some humor about it, just as being April Fool's Day. Like, I don't know, it's always helpful, especially with the seriousness of the Capricorn moon. You know.
it's pretty funny to think about Mercury going retrograde on April Fool's Day too.
Yeah,
I
I like
like
it.
that.
But that's it for that week, right? I mean,
Yep. That's
mm,
it. Then we come into the next week and we've got Venus conjuncting Neptune.
mm,
So that
hmm
brings in that kind of, and it's still in Pisces. Venus is still in Pisces here, just barely.
hmm
So it conjuncts with Neptune and it kind of pulls us back into a reminder of the values that we learned during Pisces season, a reminder of um, the collective, the suffering of the collective. We
mm,
can't not see what's happening in the world here, right? We just can't not see it. And
yeah,
typically, Aries would be like, oh, put on the blinders, blast forward, and not pay any attention to that. But obviously, with Mars in Pisces now, and now this little statement with Venus and Neptune coming together, it's like, oh, you really are being pushed to pay attention.
yeah. I just keep thinking about too how Venus is, this is the midweek between the two eclipses, the lunar eclipse, and then we have the solar eclipse. So this 2 weeks, every time you have those 2 weeks between eclipses, I always think like it's just a really interesting time because it's kind of like, I don't know, getting to see yourself under a microscope, or maybe a better way to think about it is through a telescope. Like these 2 weeks having more import than they normally might because we're in a huge pivot point with an eclipse. And so there's something here for me about Venus conjuncting Neptune is like, all right, well, that day you're kind of sitting in the delusions of why you're dependent, like what you've had to examine at the lunar eclipse, the issues of dependency. And here at this day, it's like you're not going to be able to see it. I mean, Venus is exalted in Pisces, which is helpful, but it's right there. It's right conjunct with Neptune. So I think this is a day of like where as Venus then moves into Aries the next day, you're going to be able to look back and go, oh, what are some of the lies I've told myself to that have kept me down in relationship or something. That would be one way to look at it. Or because you might find yourself in Venus Neptune, like you might want to numb out that day, and I don't know. I would encourage maybe it is numbing out, but maybe trying to do it without substances, or maybe trying to give yourself a break, take some alone time. I'm not really sure, but there's something tied into this eclipse cycle there where you're going to get to see something important about ways that I don't know, Neptune states of consciousness, so it could be something transcendent, but I think it's more typically a confusion or a misunderstanding that we've had that can now be
Yeah,
made.
it depends on a lot of things, and also thinking of conjunctions as beginning processes. You know, you could utilize this by starting a meditation practice.
Yeah.
Doing something along those lines, really opening yourself to the more transcendent side of Neptune. And yeah, you want to be cautious at this point around substances or, areas or ways that you may delude yourself or others.
Yeah, other people's false beliefs. Like this is a time of buying into other people's delusions too. That's the other
Yeah.
thing.
Don't
And
join a cult that day.
I mean, also it's like technology, right? And then I mean, also Venus sextiles Pluto as well. So it's that little segment of time for Venus is, yeah, you're
Yeah.
working hard. Something's going on with your values. You're working hard to like reckon with the collective forces, your sense of self and how you value sense of self. And then how does that work for your empowerment with that sextile? So
And then having it move into Aries right there in between those two connections with the outer planets, it moves into Aries. It's like, okay. And, Venus isn't delighted to be in Aries. It was a lot happier in Pisces, obviously. And in Aries, here it is suddenly in a Mars ruled sign, and it's not quite sure how to behave in there. But it does. At this point, there is, more energy comes into the picture for sure.
yeah. Yeah. You feel more
Right.
kind of galvanized, right?
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
something.
Right before that eclipse, which happens on the 8th at 2:17 p.m. And what's not on this list, and I'm going to see if I can draw it in here, is Chiron is right here in the midst of this eclipse.
Yeah, it's exact. It is
Just,
so tight
yeah.
in there. It's completely inseparable. So, I mean, I think it's a cazimi. I think it really is. A cazimi is when something is it's like completely fused together, and it actually creates a situation of a greater degree of empowerment. When something's cazimi, it's in the heart of the sun. So it's the beating heart of the sun here. And what is it? It's Chiron. And so it's that whole principle of having to this is why we want to call this season the reckoning, because this is the reckoning of the wound that has to do with the use of Aries energy, the way we use it collectively on the planet, the way we use it individually in our daily lives. And from my point of view, the grave misunderstanding we have about this energy and how to use it, and the havoc it's caused. So there's some kind of reckoning here. And the fact that this eclipse is happening on the East Coast of the United States is also it has my attention.
Yeah.
But God, it's a powerful moment in time. The chart for this, we've got a lot going on in Aries, and we are definitely going to make a video about this point in time too, so we can really dig in to some of those topics then too.
Yeah.
What do you think, Lori? What's your
Well, I think I'm going to have to think about it a lot more before we make the the video about it. But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it clearly is. I love just the word reckoning with it. It clearly is a reckoning. It is a pivot point. And if you've got planets or points near that 19 degrees of Aries, or really any of the cardinal signs, but mostly Aries, you want to pay special attention. This is, yeah, it's a reckoning with exactly what you said, with the principle of Aries, which is so much. All right. You know, you think of Aries, what do you think of? You think of the warrior, the pioneer, the I don't know what other archetypes, they aren't coming to mind at the moment, but just that energy of determination and fast action and not thinking about the consequences. You know, that's the Aries is a funny sign because it's easy to um well, you know, like all the signs, there's a positive side and a more challenging side. And the more challenging side of Aries is not a pretty picture. You know, you think about things like war and destruction and, you know, not taking consequences into consideration. But then again, you think about the positive side of it, and it's about strength. And, you know, I always used to say, um, if you're in a dark alley and you hear footsteps coming up behind you, you want a strong Aries component within yourself. You want to be able to tap into that energy. It is a powerful energy, and it's a very valuable energy when it's used well. The fact
Yeah.
that Chiron is in here is really pointing to the part of Aries that is destructive, or that has left this wound in its wake. And in our country, in our culture, in our world today, we can see the misuse of Aries energy everywhere we look. It's hard to see it's hard to see in our culture at this point the positive side of Aries.
Yeah,
It's
because I think, yeah, sorry, I interrupted there.
no, go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say, like, what you're bringing up to, like the dark side of Aries, the destruction. I think about like a wildfire and how it just burns everything to the ground, and like that is that's the darkest side, But the other interesting thing on the much more positive side about Aries is you don't want anyone different in the emergency room. Like Aries is that energy that runs out in front of the truck and picks a child up off the ground and saves them. So Aries also has this tremendous ability to rescue, and the ability to be available in a crisis. This is what this is about. This is about twisting this energy, like where it has been damaging and destructive, and using that energy to help us figure out this crisis, to be there in the crisis, because we are in a crisis planetarily, like however you want to look at it. You can look at any number of things to think of that. So I think it's interesting because it's almost like you want to tap the emergency technician energy of Aries in a way. Like that's kind of what we're looking at for the very damages it has caused in the past. So it's kind of I don't know. That's turning over my mind. I want to develop that idea more before we kind of have our video.
Yeah.
Because and then also for each of us personally, this is about having to reckon with that energy that can be full of rage and can be destructive, and can be, I think about like driving and being pissed off on the road, so the point is every one of us has our own microcosm of this, our own need to reckon with this type of energy, and then it can be extremely effective when used well.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. So yeah, it's really, I think that it's so important to consider both sides of that in terms of our own individual, yeah, our own path with it, thinking about where we have been wounded by this energy and where we have wounded others.
Yeah.
Because we've all been on both sides of that equation. Make no mistake about it. We've all been on both sides. Yeah.
And that's why this is a reckoning, because we all have to contend with this. You know, those of us who have sensitive points here, this is going to be even more poignant, but yeah, so I'm looking, yeah, we'll have lots to say at that video. So then we kind of move into our final couple of sections here. Oh, look, and then Mars conjunct Saturn
I know.
a couple of days after. Woo, that's talk about hitting the wall. Talk about having to take responsibility for this.
That's exactly what I was going to say. This is like, okay, you saw it back there at the eclipse. There's a pivot happening, and now it's very clear, the whole issue of responsibility.
And the fact it's still in Pisces. So we're talking about being responsible for contending with the healing of this energy, and bearing in mind healing doesn't mean fixed. You know, healing means working with, and there is parts to it about making amends. There is parts to it about, you know, being accountable. But just so, yeah, what an interesting thing to have it be in Pisces. I mean, that's where the emphasis is.
Yeah. And I also, you know, again, a conjunction. It's the beginning of a cycle. And with Mars, it's the beginning of a 2-year cycle. If you know, look at where 14 degrees Pisces is in your chart, think about beginning a cycle of really, you know, understanding your own use of energy and your own responsibility for it.
Yeah. Whew. And then we hit that midpoint of the Mercury retrograde cycle right there. That's all that really means, or going to be the middle. And then we have the first quarter moon. So remember, a first quarter moon is an active phase. The moon will be in Cancer here. So this is kind of, I don't know, this kind of piggybacks to me on the Pisces conversation, like the need for some kind of action around healing, because, you know, Cancer is the mother energy. So that means self-mothering. That means that tricky balance of being protective versus being vulnerable, trying to find that. There's something in that. There's some kind of action that will need to be taken regarding those topics. At least that's how I tend to interpret those.
Yeah, it's time to put your money where your mouth is. Take some action there.
Yeah.
And then we've got right after that, we've got Mercury retrograde conjuncting Venus. You know, that's just going back. It's like there's something more that Mercury has already contended with, but it's going back. How is this working? How am I thinking about my values around this Aries energy? It's really pretty simple, I think.
And I just was noticing it's pretty close to the eclipse energy. So this is like a healing balm.
Oh, yeah.
I feel like this is a little bit of a soothing balm over that eclipse energy with Venus there, and Mercury being like, oh, okay, I need to change my mindset here. Or I need to kind of exhale.
Just talking about this makes me feel like,
I know. And then the sun goes into Taurus, and that'll be a whole nother conversation. So
yes, a whole nother conversation indeed. Okay, so that wraps that up. And well, I'd like to move on to our individual impacts, but I have to wait for my computer to let me do that.
Number one. Okay, so for those of you with Aries rising, this Aries season is falling in your first house. So again, first house, the most powerful house of the whole system here. So to have Aries rising here, this is lighting something up about your overall personality that's tied in with being an Aries, because you're Aries rising. So there's something happening here. The first house refers to your overall life direction. So as an Aries rising person, you are very, what's the word? Like, I guess, self-oriented in how you move about the world. So that's what this Aries season is bringing up. Now, from our extensive conversation before, we had a lot of conversation around the need for healing to continue. So I'm reading this as the Pisces area of your chart, which is the 12th house, is still being activated during this Aries season. And that's where the healing is happening. So those of you with Aries rising, you're having to kind of work with this idea that you are contending with collective suffering. Or maybe it's like suffering or struggles in your subconscious. That's another way to look at the 12th house. You're having to kind of still work with that material while also being activated to move around the world in a different way. Not to mention the eclipse that's happening, or the set of eclipses, but the one on April 8th in particular is really suggesting a pivot in how you use this very forceful energy, how you master this energy and use it and wield it in the world is coming into question. And you're going to have an opportunity to do this in a completely different manner than what you've done before, where you're able to consider those deep collective forces that the Pisces season represented and brought up for you. Like you are going to move forwards carrying that with you. You're not going to lose sight of that anymore. That's what this opportunity represents. Like that you're going to be able to be, continue to work with that warrior energy, but without it being selfish, but with being more inclusive and more collectively based. So it's kind of a tall order, but that's what the season's about. So
Yeah, I think of it sort of like, what you've been through during Pisces season of kind of opening your inner self to the suffering of humanity, or, however you want to look at that. This with Chiron and the lunar eclipse happening there on the 8th, there's really a piece of really understanding how you, even in your direct, strong, fiery Aries nature, how that inner wound impacts your use of that Aries energy and making a determination or a pivotal move in really having the courage to do it a different way, having the courage to be courageous in a way that's more compassionate.
yeah.
Yeah.
I think the key thing you're going to have to think about as an Aries rising person is you're becoming more aware. You're becoming more self-aware of what it means to hold this Aries energy when you walk around. Like, holding that is, I mean, it's a little bit like if you're unconscious, you're walking around with a sword in your hand, without even knowing it. So the idea here is to get clear about how are you walking around in the world and, taking that to a new level using courage, to kind of face what that can mean, and looking at the full spectrum of what Aries can be and accepting that and incorporating that, bringing self-compassion in. There's something about the awareness here.
That's
Yep.
great. Okay. I think that's good for Aries rising. Let's move on to folks who have Taurus rising. Um, okay, so if you've got Taurus rising, you come across as a very calm person with that Taurus rising, and yet hidden away in the depths of your unconscious is the warrior energy. That's where you have that Aries energy. And during Aries season, this is the area that's lit up. So there's some way in which you're really determining a new understanding of your unconscious use of strength, determination, courage, all of those things. You want to think back over the past month during Pisces season, there's a lot of deep dive into kind of the softer areas of your connection with community, with others. Somewhere during that time, think about how compassion or understanding or sensitivity has come through in the past month from community, from like-minded others, and bringing that to yourself, to your own inner unconscious nature. Hmm.
Yeah, this is an interesting one
It's an
because
interesting one.
yeah, it's like, so both the 11th and the 12th houses are very concerned with collective issues.
Right.
These are broad strokes. This is not personal. Yet here you are with the most personal sign of the zodiac, Aries, in the most impersonal, collectively minded, emotionally sensitive place, in the chart in a lot of ways. So it's funny because I think that Taurus rising people, there might be some familiarity here with having to kind of cut through some fogginess to get to the sense of self, like to be not quite sure about the sense of self because it's so buried in that 12th collective house. But at the same time, this is a pivot point where you can twist that for good, where you can start to understand how your individual energy and your individual, use of Aries energy now can really be, used for collective good. I mean, that's kind of what I'm seeing with this chart. Like it's really pushing you to move way beyond any sort of selfishness. Yet the irony is to do that, you have to get into yourself,
Mhm.
where the Aries is during Aries season. And then you can learn how that plays in this much bigger picture. So I see this as a pivot point. I mean, it is anyway, right? Because we've got the eclipse, that solar
Right,
eclipse on April 8th, which is
right.
really going to give you a
And
moment to ponder these issues deeply. Like, how do you fit in? What is your impact
yeah.
on the collective suffering in the world?
Yeah, it's interesting to think about people with Taurus rising having so much like courage and determination and all those kind of Aries things in the realm of being able to look into their unconscious.
Mm,
It's interesting, but there is something in that unconscious understanding of um, Aries energy that is going to be really deeply rethought and pivoted in a new direction. Mercury is going to be retrograde in there. You're going to be really thinking about these deep levels of your own internal understanding.
yeah, and like see how your actions are going to have consequences, right?
Yeah.
Like Aries normally doesn't bother with that, but now you're really getting, oh, I need to do this work because that's the only way I'm going to have an impact.
Right. Wow. Something about how you said that just um it's like there's that, yeah, that need to really look at your own, how your unconscious impacts the world. I don't know. There was something clicked in
Yeah,
my mind. I
interesting.
don't think I can articulate it yet. That's
Okay,
really interesting.
another.
Okay, let's move on
Yeah.
to folks with Gemini rising.
Okay, so those of you with Gemini rising, this Aries season is taking place in your 11th house. The 11th house is groups, your group alliances, your like-minded, cohorts. It's your community. So I always think with Gemini rising, you've got this Aries energy in front of groups. So I always just very naturally can think about, oh, it's leader energy in front of a group. It's Aries leadership energy, like the ability to stand up and be autonomous and lead the group in a good direction. That's, I mean, in a nutshell, that's kind of what you already have here. And it's interesting to think about how the connection to Pisces season. So Pisces season really encouraged us to do some rest and recuperation and do some healing. And for those of you at Gemini rising, that all had to do with your career. I think about how the career or the profession or how you show up in public, it's the other way to think about it, your social reputation, how that, you're showing up in a Pisces way in that 10th house. So I see that there's some truth to the idea that it could be pretty draining or exhausting, or it could be that you've needed to find a way to get more rest and recuperation at your workplace during all that stuff. And now it's moved into Aries season, and here you are, the sun is in Aries, you're starting to take that leadership capacity with you, but you're not done with the healing. You're not done with, I don't know, the possible energy drain was one way I was thinking about that work could be. You're not finished with that. You have to keep working with that. You have to keep working with that healing energy. And, furthermore, solar eclipse is happening on the 8th, April 8th. So that is a pivot point in terms of how you use the Aries energy in front of groups. Like, so that's an opportunity to fold in more of that deep healing, understanding, empathy you've had to cultivate, and use that as part of how you lead. I mean, there's something about, and I realize I'm looking at this as like one kind of scenario, and there's other scenarios that are going to be for people who are Gemini rising. But it's one way to think about it. You have to incorporate that Pisces energy into this pivot of using your effective Aries energy. Like you're learning how to use it for good on a deeper level that has a bigger impact, that takes in other people's suffering and sensitivity into account. So something like that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was thinking about this also. The 11th house also is just the area where we receive.
Mm.
You know, with Aries in the 11th house, I can imagine some people really needing to develop a lot of courage in order to receive from the larger community.
Mm.
And and
Mhm.
possibly that direct action, that directness in that house for someone with Gemini rising could could be a difficulty. I'm spinning out here, but this is
No, I like
interesting
what you're
because
getting at. Yeah.
yeah, there's something in there about I can just imagine like my direct, courageous, kind of almost angry energy in community is where is part of why I can't receive,
Mm.
you know?
Mhm. Yeah.
And this being a point in time where you really can use that energy and face courage in a different kind of way, like
Mm.
use that pivot of the eclipse on the 8th and the Mercury retrograde to really rethink how you understand your own Aries energy, your own direct action taking, maybe anger. There's
Mm.
something in that's quite interesting, but nevertheless, thinking about how you use Aries energy within the scope of the community that you need to support you.
Yeah. No, I think.
Changing changing your role there, changing how you lead, bringing some compassion to your leadership.
Mhm. I like how you brought in the whole receiving love thing, because it makes me feel like, you're going to be the leader in the group because you got the energy there, but really you want to be the leader because you're called to be the leader. You're doing a service and you're letting your community say, "Hey, we need you to do this. You have the skill set." So letting the community kind of be like, "No, we need your leadership." It's kind of that. It's like being able to take in the support, like you said, in order to do that. And if you're just taking charge because you're taking charge, well, that's where the learning is. Now you're learning you're not just taking charge, you're taking charge. You're doing it because you're actually receiving the support and love of the community, and being part of the community by doing that, and something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, Aries is a tricky thing. Wherever we have it in our charts, we really have to navigate it with some, I don't know, some sensitivity, because
Leather gloves.
there is that tendency to just run roughshod in that area. So, if you find yourself someone who tends to run roughshod whenever you're in a place where others are supposed to support you, but you're like running roughshod over them, this is something to really think about. Anyway,
Great.
um, let's move on.
Yeah.
So now we're going to go on to folks who have Cancer rising. If you've got Cancer rising, the Aries season is lighting up your 10th house. Over the past, during Pisces season, there was a lot of really deep learning around your own sensitivity to the bigger world, your own compassion toward what's happening in um, the larger container that we call your worldview, whatever that may be. At this point, with the sun moving into Aries, you're really contending with your yourself as a force to be reckoned with in terms of your career. Where do you have the determination and the courage to take the actions that are necessary? Where are you a leader in your social sphere, your social reputation? There's a lot going on here, and you want to be really cognizant of the fact that on the 8th of March, we're going to be having that lovely eclipse that is really going to allow you to look deeply and make a change in how you approach that, how you use that kind of energy in your career.
Hmm. I think it's interesting, we've been talking a lot about this idea that during this Aries season, we're making this transition from Pisces to Aries, and that is an interesting transition because Pisces is the end of the whole zodiac cycle. Aries is the beginning. So you're being asked, in a sense, with Cancer rising, to take that, what have you learned from the previous cycle, and then how do you want to incorporate it in the new cycle? You're being asked to take that in the most public place of the chart, essentially, or the 10th is the most public place and the 9th is sort of a subsidiary. Like, what learning, what experiences to do with suffering and empathy have you been taking on board, and then how do you now take that and start incorporating it in your profession or how you show up in public? I mean, that's kind of, you gotta, like, taking the two parts of life together, just thinking about what that really means, and the fact that we still have Mars and Pisces during this whole thing. There's still this enormous learning that's happening about, those. I just think of those two topics: the suffering in the world, the suffering of others, and then the empathy, the compassion and empathy that you develop for that suffering. And that's where there's a huge amount of learning. And now your task at this April 8th pivot point, and Mercury retrograde in there too, your task is to start really incorporating that deep understanding into your work, into the way you do Aries things in public, way you perform that Aries in public, through, and it's generally going to be your profession or work that you do, or if you don't have a profession or whatever, you are still showing up in public in some way. So that's what the task here is, and taking those two pieces together and knitting
Yeah,
them together.
it's really tasking you to have the courage to bring that level of sensitivity to your workplace or your social reputation. Would you say, does that seem right to you?
I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, I think absolutely. I mean, it is difficult. Take all the suffering, the sensitivity, and say, you know what, this needs to be included. This needs to be brought to the table. This isn't something to just gallop on your horse over and screw all that and never mind that sensitivity. This is nope. This is how you bring it with you and how you, make the work that you're doing beneficial on a collective level, and for really trying to tackle these issues.
Yeah, it's like with Aries. I always think when I see Aries at the top of the chart, I always think of people, having jobs that involve knives or hammers or like kind of work. And at this point for people with Cancer rising, it's like, okay, you've got all that energy to do that kind of work, and you've probably done that kind of work throughout your life. And now you have to bring that same determination and that same courage, but allow it to open doors of, have the courage to allow that strength to open into super sensitive areas.
Yeah, I mean, it is kind of like, yeah, that's interesting to think about that way too, because I think now the task at hand is what needs the enormous amount of courage is to do your own healing work, to face the healing, to face the suffering and the pain, and then to do the healing work. That's what you're being called to do. And that's how we need to all start using Aries energy, and that's what I think the message is of this eclipse,
Yeah.
is happening. And those of you Cancer rising, this is just happening in a very public way. And so you're part of you want to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. That's what we're aiming at here. But there is something about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. I love that. Okay, let's move on to folks with Leo rising.
Okay, so those of you with Leo rising, this means that you have Aries in your ninth house, and that Aries season is lighting up that ninth house. The ninth house, I just think of this as the gathering of wisdom, the experiences that you've had in your life, the travel that you've done, the teachers you've studied with, the schools you've engaged with. You've kind of gathered up all this stuff, and then you have this worldview, which is the made of all those materials put together. And here you have Aries. So, it's interesting because on one hand, that could be very, the negative Aries would be just being very selfish around your, like kind of limited in your worldview. And you're being called at this time to to totally work in the other end of the spectrum, which is to think about how you can be the most courageous in incorporating your worldview. And how are you doing that? Well, a Pisces season that happened just before the season brought in all of this energy around learning how to contend with the suffering of other people, their deep emotional baggage, where you have Pisces. And so you've had all that learning, and Mars is still there. Mars is still back there in Pisces in your eighth house. So it's very much about really understanding the issues that other people have. What is the seed of their suffering? What is the issue? What is the sensitivity? And then bring that deep, profound understanding that you, Leo rising people, have into your worldview and insist that that be incorporated into the worldview. That's where the Aries comes in, where you insist that this has to be the new way, and that's what this is lighting up.
I love how you just said all of that. I think that's really great, Jenny. It really is. Wherever Aries is, there can be a tendency to be really selfish. So, on a really negative level, people with Leo rising could be really selfish in their worldview. Like, oh, who cares if there's wars or, whatever's going on in the world? It doesn't matter because, it's all about me. And my worldview is this particular way. And yet, yeah, exactly. Bringing in what you have learned in that eighth house, what you have learned about the individual suffering of people and incorporating that. That's really, I think this is a really important and beautiful statement of, finding a new way of seeing your place in the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so. And I mean, it's like Leo's such a performance sign too, and you have that rising. So this is you can be very dramatic, but it's time to use that drama to put it to good use. Like bring attention to how we need to face the difficulties and face the suffering of others.
So yeah, the eclipse bringing in the pivot point. There's a change here happening in your worldview. And then the Mercury retrograde gives you a good 3 weeks to think about it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now we're going to move on to folks who have Virgo rising. If you've got Virgo rising, the Aries season is lighting up your eighth house. Huh. Okay. So this is lighting up your eighth house. The eighth house is really where we grapple with the struggles of other people, the baggage other people bring to the relationships we have with them. It's really a very powerful area of the chart. We think about it as, it's where we have to set boundaries. We have to really understand other people from where they come from. Now, we're coming out of Pisces season. So this is a real shift from the sensitivity and the hopefully over Pisces season. You did a lot of really reflecting and developing a deeper, real sensitive compassionate understanding of the people that you are in relationship with. And out of that comes this need to face how you're navigating people's stuff and bringing a little more compassion there. You know, if you've got Virgo rising and you've got Aries on the 8th house, again, there can be, particularly when we're young, a lot of selfishness in how we navigate other people's stuff. So this is really an opportunity to find a different way, to find a different story for yourself. You're not in a battle against other people's baggage and what they're bringing to the table. You are really needing here with the eclipse a shift of direction, a development of really the courage to open your heart and understand where other people are coming from in a really deep way. And with Mercury being retrograde for 3 weeks, you're going to have a lot of time to think about it.
Mm.
Think about how you've done it in the past and how you want to change that story.
Yeah. This one is really interesting because one of the things we've been talking about is how in the zodiac, Pisces is the end and is closings and is kind of this like dissolving kind of feeling to it. And then, Aries is the brand new start again. And it's interesting to have that split right between the 7th and the 8th house, because when you take these two houses together, the 7th and the 8th, they really have a lot to say about our personal relationships, because the 7th house is kind of like, hey, you get together, you show up in public in a certain way. It's a public relationship. You show up as a couple, you're going to the party or whatever. And there's a lot of sensitivity and a lot of ability to kind of, might be challenging, but to welcome in a more empathetic view of your partner, but then the 8th house is the part B. The 8th house is when you start bumping into the deeper layers of the relationship. And, and all of a sudden it's like, hey, you know what? You just totally violated a boundary. I'm out of here. I think that Aries has the ability to be like, no, this is what myself needs. And I can see how in the negative, that could be a cut and run. Like things seem like they're going really well. And all of a sudden, as a Virgo rising person, you're like, I'm done. I'm out. But I also see how this could bring used in for more positive. This is a huge ability to kind of say, hey, I've got a lot of compassion for the relationship. And here's where my boundaries are. Here's where you, partner, you're saying as a Virgo rising place, you need to kind of look at your stuff, because I can see where I end. Like this is my boundary and this is where you begin. So there's some work here. So the question really is, how do you communicate kindly and say, look, I do see a clear boundary here, and I just need you to I'm going to give you some reflection. I have compassion for you. I've got Pisces all over the place in the 7th house. I got lots of compassion, but here's a line. And I could see that as being really helpful and allowing there to be enough space in the relationship to be like, you do your work, I'll keep doing mine. There's something about those topics. Yeah, really interesting place. And like during this Pisces season, you've got that eclipse on April 8th, landing, in the middle of this house, and you just have an opportunity to reflect on that. Ask yourself, where am I able to set these boundaries? Like, I know I can do them, but the question is, can you do them with sensitivity and compassion, or is it more of a, nope, you hit the wall and I'm done? That's the nuance that I think that this eclipse can really help you. And that'll bring you to a whole new place in relationships. That's going to be a whole different beast.
Yeah, and the Chiron in there too. So there's really, I think there's a lot to look at for folks with Virgo rising around how their ability or inability to set boundaries has been a wounding factor for themselves and others.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, it's really time to tell a different story about how you navigate other people's stuff and your own boundaries. That's powerful stuff here. This is really an interesting Aries season, I'll tell you. Okay, so we're going to move on now to folks with Libra rising.
All right, so those of you with Libra rising, well, this Aries season puts the focus firmly in your seventh house. In the very simple manner, Libra rising, your first house, and then the house of other, you have Aries here. So this is just how you work with the other. We usually talk about this as partnerships, one-on-one connections with people. This and the seventh house also, it's, it's visible to the public, it's above the horizon, so it's relationships that you may or may not have some sort of social contract with, or I should say you may have some kind of social contract with. So that kind of brings an interesting little twist to it. But this Aries season is really bringing the attention to, hey, how do I do partnership? How do I want to be a partner? What do I have? What expectations do I have of whoever I'm with? I mean, there's something about all of those topics. And the interesting part here is we have been talking, we meaning Laurie and I have been talking about, that there's still a lot going on in Pisces. There's still some sort of healing that you've had to do during Pisces season and that continues to do with your routines, to do with your day-to-day life, the habits you have, the things that keep you healthy. Very important area of life that gets kind of overlooked. But you've had to do some healing in that area. And now you're being asked to take that understanding and bring it with you as you start getting into this Aries space of your partnerships and your partners. So it's really just a way of saying, like, you need to incorporate more sensitivity, empathy for yourself through your routines, and then bring that forward into your relationship, and to bring more sensitivity into whatever your partner needs, if that's what you're dealing with, or whoever you're in the moment with. There's something about that, just having to bring in a more compassionate stance rather than just being like, you know what, I'm doing me. I got Aries here, so I'm just gonna do my own sort of selfish thing here. Not that you're necessarily selfish, but that sometimes you could be using that Aries energy not so well. And it's easy to see that because partnerships are difficult. But there's something about that. And you have this opportunity, this pivot point of the eclipses here, this pivot point to do this a little bit differently and bring in a deeper level of, I think it's compassion for the other person, but also for yourself. And know that you're just trying to do the best you can with your routines and your health things that you're doing through Pisces, that healing, and that you need to, I almost advocate that for yourself in the partnership as well. So, yeah.
Yeah. Thinking about, people with Libra rising, how they kind of show up in the world trying to please everybody else. And yet, there is that outward expression of pleasing others. And yeah, people with Libra rising that tends to be a big theme in their lives. And yet, when it comes to relationship, there's not quite so much of that. When it comes to a personal relationship, there's a lot more definitive expectations. And there tends to be, they tend to involve themselves in relationships with people who have a lot of strength and kind of Aries type energy. And it's interesting. I think people with Libra rising really do have to take some time during this period of time to consider how they have been, with Chiron in there in the middle of that eclipse, how have they been wounded in relationships by that kind of aggression, possibly, and how they have wounded others with that relational aggression. So thinking about that and realizing that this is a time to really work with allowing the expectations of relationships to soften, to allow yourself to see the damaged places or the places that may potentially be damaged, and allow yourself to bring some of the warmth and compassion from Pisces season into that to make a change. Really, there's a need to be courageous in facing those issues.
Yeah. think I'll add to that just a little bit, which is just this idea that having Libra and Aries on your first and seventh house, it seems sort of clear cut. There's this topic, there's me, there's the other person. But I see, as you're talking about this, I'm sort of seeing how there's can be quite a bit of confusion here too, because there's a lot of projection that happens in relationships. It's just part of what we do as human beings, that we have these hidden parts of ourselves we can't see, and they end up being reflected back to us in the partners that we choose. You end up seeing. So if you're with a partner, for example, if you're with a partner who has some of those more aggressive traits, that's you also learning how to get in touch with that more assertive part of yourself.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean you should stay in a relationship as bad. Let's make that clear. But the idea on a psychological level that you're trying to learn how to apply that more courageous energy in your relationship and to do it well during this Aries season, because you're learning how to incorporate that more compassionate side into it. So that's really what this is kind of funny. It looks clear cut, but it just isn't. It's actually kind of murky and confusing. So
Yeah, it's an interesting one. Okay, let's move on to folks who have Scorpio rising. So if you've got Scorpio rising, the Aries season is lighting up your sixth house. The sixth house is the area of it's the area of our day-to-day routines that support our lives, that support our physical being, that support how we function in the world. That sixth house can involve everything from dietary issues to exercise issues to health issues. There's a lot in that, and we tend to underestimate the importance of the sixth house, but really understanding that our routines are so much the base of how everything functions. So over the course, let's see, with Aries there, yeah, you've got Scorpio rising. So there's this deep intensity that you come into the world with, and you tend to approach these issues of your day-to-day routine with a lot of assertiveness and drive. You can be kind of probably brutal with yourself, having really determined expectations of how you manage your health routines, etc. You want to reflect back on what's been happening over the past month during Pisces season. During Pisces season, we talked a lot about the sensitivity, developing sensitivity, giving yourself a rest, kind of incorporating some development of compassion in some ways. And that was happening in your fifth house. So think about how you bring compassion and understanding and sensitivity to your own creative processes, possibly. And at this point, it's like you're continuing that process as we go from Pisces to Aries. And with the way things are set up, we're bringing that sensitivity that we've been developing into the area of Aries. So, long story short, what you're really trying to do here, what you need to do, what the pivot is bringing you to, is developing a more compassionate approach to your own how you manage those routines. There's a wound in there with Chiron. There's something for you to look at of how you can potentially be being hurt by how aggressive you approach these issues. So you want to really think about making a pivot, making a change, bringing more compassion to yourself in how you manage your life.
mhm. Yeah, but I was just thinking, like,
Mm.
so as a Scorpio rising person, having a water sign on the rising sign, like how important it is for you to find flow, to find movement, and how that Pisces area of your life, the fifth house, is really important to that flow space. And there's something about letting yourself dissolve into the creative processes or dissolve into the way you give of yourself, like this unbridled giving of love, like the topics that Laurie has already mentioned. There's something about that being a very important place where you learn how to be more forgiving to yourself, where you learn how to work through the suffering, or the pain of different things of life. And so it is, but then yet you come to the sixth house, and just like Laurie's been saying, suddenly you're like, there's a lot of potential for you to be pretty harsh here. And be like,
Yeah.
I just need to burn some energy. And of course, it depends where your own Mars is in your own chart. That's been an interesting study. But we don't know that because I'm not sure who's watching. But anyway, it's really important to just kind of realize that, yeah, there's almost like, as you're saying, this harshness. And yes, the task is about how do you bring that nourishing Pisces, healing, retreat, like flowing, compassionate energy into your routines. And that's part of what you're being called to do. Just again, Laurie has already mentioned, like, this is what you're being called to do during this Aries season, is how do you soften that? How you bring, it's almost like you have this ability to love other people like unconditionally without boundaries of Pisces there, but all of a sudden you come to your own routines and you're like a dick to yourself. So it's like, how do you not do that? Like, you're learning to master this energy in a new way and incorporate this more compassionate, loving sense of self into your routines. And finding new ways to express yourself, like, maybe you don't need to go out and run 10 miles anymore. Maybe you can do it a little bit differently. So,
Yeah.
for example, anyway.
Yeah, I think this really is about finding a new way to take care of yourself. I think it's
Yeah,
really as simple as that for people with
yeah,
Scorpio rising, finding a new way to care for your body and
mhm,
your life.
yeah,
And with Mercury retrograde in there for 3 weeks, you're going to have plenty of time to think about it.
yeah.
Okay, moving on to folks with Sagittarius rising.
Okay, so those of you with Sagittarius rising, you have Aries in your fifth house. That means you just have this warm, fiery, independent energy in your the way you give of yourself, the way you give love is very Aries. It's very it's hot energy, and it's this fierce love is what I kind of see here. So that can play out in some different ways, but that's what Aries season is really lighting up for you. And that's the area that's coming into question during all these pivots we have, because we have the solar eclipse that's going to be landing very poignantly in your fifth house. So you have an opportunity to reflect on how you want to do this area of your life differently. How do you want to give of yourself? I mean, this is so much you giving your personal self to other people. And so there's a question here about, how do you want to do that? How do you want to offer that fierce energy out? And part of what Laurie and I have been talking about is just simply the idea that, well, we've just had a Pisces season that has been so much about resting and recuperating. And Mars, the planet that rules all this Aries stuff, is still in Pisces during this Aries season. So in other words, you're still learning how, at the core foundation of your personality, learning how to be more compassionate towards yourself, learning how to allow for sensitivities and allow for some softening. Um, it also, you have been learning about suffering and sensitivity through your family. Your family members, your home life is a source of you needing to develop this profound compassion. And so you've been doing that during Pisces season, and now your task is to kind of bring the two together. Is to, how do you bring that more nourishing, compassionate energy to the way that you give of yourself to others? Is there a way that you can, like, there's definitely an implication that you almost might give almost too much of yourself, in through that fifth house. That could be, if you're doing it without cognizance of this kind of softer, more sensitive area of yourself.
Hmm.
So that's your task, is to kind of bring in that more compassionate stuff that you've learned about through your home life, and bring it into the way that you give to other people and pour your energy into others.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I think about, with Pisces season moving into Aries season, going from the fourth to the fifth house, you can think how this could play out people who have children, you know, the development of compassion within the home, and then things moving into Aries, bringing the idea of how you're giving to your children. There could be real changes happening at this time in regards to your children, or, you know, if you don't have children, in regards to your creative developments. But you really want to look, are you being overly aggressive in that area? There's going to be changes. There's going to be changes with that that eclipse happening, with Chiron in there. There's a way in which you are being tasked to rearrange the way you're approaching these things, rework how you're doing it. And with Mercury retrograde, you're going to have about 3 weeks to really think about it, and think about how you have possibly overdone it in this area, or been overly aggressive or assertive in that area. So you want to kind of tweak that at this time. Okay.
I like how you brought children into it. I just want to mention one other thing real just quickly here. The idea that like the compassion you can learn about watching children who are struggling, and then applying that same thing to, you know, there's something about getting in touch with your child energy here. Like having a sensitivity towards, you know, the child in you as well. There's some interplay there that I thought would be interesting to think about. Anyway.
I love that fifth house, just the,
Yeah.
you know, the how we give of ourselves. It's such a rich area. Okay, so we're going to move now on to folks who have Capricorn rising. If you've got Capricorn rising, the Aries season is highlighting your fourth house. We can think of the fourth house as the root core of our lives. We can think of it as our home, our family. Jennie often talks about it as possibly the land that you are rooted to. So it's your ancestral line. It's all that, the core. This is an area, if you've got Capricorn rising, you've got Aries here. So there's a way in which your expectations and your way of being within that home and family area has a lot of heat and determination and strength. So we're coming off Pisces season, where the focus was on your third house. You want to think about, you know, as we pivot from Pisces into Aries, with the ruler of Aries still in Pisces, we want to think about what we've been learning, how we've been utilizing the idea of rest and retreat, and, you know, all those things of developing compassion within that area of the third house. So somehow, the third house is about communication. It's also about our immediate environment, siblings, neighbors. There's some way in which you've been learning sensitivity in that area. And at this point, you want to really bring what you've learned. Maybe you've learned new ways of communicating that you're now able to bring into the family unit, and develop a new way of approaching the members within your family. With the eclipse happening here, you know, it really is a time to make a pivot in terms of that, you know, how you approach those things. You know, you want to really think about it. Have I been overbearing? Am I really overbearing with my family, in my home? Have I knocked down too many walls? You know, do I need to, you know, stop tearing things apart here and start being a little softer and a little more compassionate, and, you know, finding the more positive side of Aries, the strength and determination, and setting aside the aggression. But there's a pivot that needs to be made. You want to think about it. How do you use Aries energy within your home and family? And at this point in time, making a change, making a shift consciously With Mercury retrograde for 3 weeks, you're going to have time to think about it.
That's interesting thinking about, the Capricorn rising person, the strategist or the CEO that walks in the room that Capricorn represents. And I just keep thinking that part of that is because you've been forged in the fires of your family, where your fierce independent self, you have got to have found a way to stand up for yourself in your family of origin. I mean, there's something about that too. There's a fierceness right down there in the very bottom of your chart that's just sort of like, yeah. And I think that because, Capricorn rising people, it's like they walk in the room and whether you're an authority or not, people think that you are, and that comes from somewhere. And I think it comes from this fourth house.
Mm.
And it's fascinating because when you think about that split between Pisces, the very end of the zodiac, and we're closing and we're, the softening down and you're developing compassion, all these things. And then you hit that line and now you're like Aries in your family of origin. So it's almost like a Capricorn rising person has this ability to be sensitive and compassionate and kind when talking to the common person, like maybe talking, to the mail carrier or talking to the clerk in the store. And it's like just these Pisces things. And then you come to your family of origin and you're like, hey, F off. I mean, like the distinction between those two things is this sharp line. And this season is all about incorporating what you've learned from the cycle before and bringing it in. So it's like, yes, softening somehow, while not losing your sense of self in the family. That's not the issue. It's just how do you operate more compassionately and kind of take that learning that you get from your common person conversations, or even your conversations with your siblings, and apply them to your current living situation or even family of origin. This is an interesting line to cross, but to carry that forwards into a new cycle.
It is. Okay,
Yeah.
great. Thanks, Jenny. Let's move on to folks who have Aquarius rising.
Okay, so those of you with Aquarius rising, you have this fierce, independent spirit in how you communicate. That's where Aries is in your chart. That's what this Aries season is illuminating, is this time of using your voice, expressing your independent spark through your voice. That's what the main topic is here. Now we have an unusual Aries season. We have an Aries season where you're being asked to do more introspection about the origins of your kind of more fierce and independent spirit here. So it's not your normal Aries season. You're really having to look, dig down deep as part of the season before you go expressing yourself. The reason for this is that although it's Aries season, as we mentioned in the beginning, there is a solar eclipse that's happening on April 8th. And that's an opportunity to do your Aries energy a bit differently here. So if you're used to just going ahead and using your voice, that's great. It's good to use your voice. But now you're being tasked with incorporating another level of sensitivity, another way of doing things. And the reason for this is because although you have all this Aries energy, Mars, the ruling planet of Aries, is still in Pisces. So there's still some healing work that's going on. You had Pisces season, you're being asked to kind of rest and recuperate and chill out. And Mars is still there. So you're not done with the healing that you need to do. And the healing for you is all about healing your issues of worth, how you value yourself. Maybe it shows up in your finances. There's some weird relationship that many of us have with money. So there's something that you've been looking at and working with, and you're still needing to really work with those issues. So it's almost like you have to develop another level of, or you've been developing another level of self-love in that kind of self-worth area. And now the simple, very difficult task ahead of you is how to incorporate that sense of self-love and that lovingness into the way you take fierce action, so into the way you use your voice. So you're still using that Aries energy to have this, independent spirit in the way that you communicate, but you're really being tasked with bringing in a level of compassion, a level of the understanding of the suffering that can happen into the way you talk to other people. And it might mean that you may need to learn how to listen a little more with Aries here. Like it might not be very easy to take in what other people are saying. So that could be part of it, like just learning how to be a bit more receptive could be part of this whole picture. But something like that for this season, that's where your focus is going to be.
I was also thinking about using your voice for fierce compassion. You
Mm,
know, just really understanding the strength of your voice and yeah, bringing compassion in. That is the most important thing, is developing an understanding of how the strength of your voice impacts others.
mm,
With people with Aquarius rising, there can be such a coolness in how they approach things, and yet, coming into is interesting actually, as I'm looking at this, just thinking about how someone with Aquarius rising can use their voice in just those relationships, like neighbors, siblings, etc. How direct those people can be. And it can, make no mistake. I guess that's all I want to say. With Aquarius rising, make no mistake of the impact of your voice, and making sure that you begin really learning how to bring a little more compassion, a little more understanding to how you use it. And with the pivot that's going on with the eclipse and the Mercury retrograde, I love it that in the middle of all of this, we've got that 3-week Mercury retrograde that's going to really give us some time to consider it and think about it and begin reworking how we're doing what it is we need to be doing. So,
yeah, I like how you kind of intimated that whole idea of like, this is like speaking up for the underdog. That's
yeah,
what I thought of when you were talking about that, like
yeah.
speaking up for those who are suffering and using your voice as the warrior to speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves. So I love that was great.
Which makes perfect sense for somebody with
Yeah,
Aquarius rising who has that humanitarian focus. Yeah, that's
yeah,
perfect. I'm glad you brought that in.
yeah.
Okay, so now let's move on to folks with Pisces rising. If
Mm,
you've got Pisces rising, you know, this Aries season is pushing things into your second house. Jenny and I have been talking a lot about that point that we're crossing, that line that we're crossing between the Pisces season into the Aries season. So over the past month during Pisces season, there was an awful lot for you with Pisces rising around really developing an inner developing more sensitivity toward yourself, more understanding, more compassion toward yourself. And now, with the sun moving into Aries and all that's going on during Aries season here happening in your second house, you really want to be thinking about developing more compassion around your own ability to value yourself. Those things are quite close. But if you've got Pisces rising, you kind of show up in the world with this very sensitive way. You have a very sensitive way of approaching your life. And yet, when it comes to your second house, which we can think of as money, resources, and self-worth, you've got a very fiery desire to take action. You've got a very assertive nature around how you manage and think about resources and your self-worth. So, are you super sensitive on the surface, and yet when it comes to um, your own valuing of yourself, are you super aggressive with yourself or overly assertive? And that's
mm,
how I'm sort of thinking about this. I may be missing something obvious, but during this time, you want to really bring some more sensitivity and compassion to how you manage those issues. Do you struggle with that connection between money, resources, and self-worth? Those things are closely connected. If we don't have any money in the bank, our self-worth tends to take quite a tumble. And are you, busy beating yourself up because you're not making enough money? Or, does the fact that there's issues around finances really hurting your self-esteem? You want to really think about how you're managing that within yourself. Yeah, in terms of how aggressive are you with yourself around these issues? And with this eclipse happening, there's a real pivot point. There's a real ability and need to become kinder to yourself in this regard. And with the Mercury retrograde, you've got a lot of time to think about it, to think about how you are making and spending money, and how you allow that to determine your self-worth.
Yeah, that's great. It's interesting thinking about that because there is a fierceness associated with the second house. And what I was thinking of, the second house is traditionally one of the more challenging houses in the chart. And part of it is, it's because it's tied in with self-worth issues, like it is how you value yourself. And it is somewhat of an extension of your identity, your original identity. It's interesting thinking about, like, just like you said, Laurie, having all that sensitivity as part of your initial identity. But then there's this, really fierce energy right next door to it that's to do with your value system. And I would think that one of the things that could be difficult or in the more negative would be that you would seriously overcompensate. If you had a struggle with self-worth and you were, there would be a lot of to cover that up, a lot of like, it's if you're behaving in a manner that's way beyond what really is warranted here, that's just a cue that there's some work to be done here, especially during this Aries season where there's Chiron in here, illuminating any wounds. And then as you've mentioned, you've got the Mercury retrograde, you got plenty of time to ruminate on it. And then also this eclipse. I mean, this is time to do it differently. So this is a time to really evaluate how you feel about yourself. Like, I think because even if it's to do with money, to me, the self-worth issue is the deepest layer here. And there's some relationship here. So this is giving you a chance to do this in a different way. And if you do find that you're kind of overcompensating, like trying to too much prove your worth here, there's something that you can do to have a little more compassion for yourself, build a better relationship with this part of yourself. And that's going to allow you to make the switch that we're talking about at the eclipse, that you can do this in a different manner. It doesn't have to be harsh, is the point. It can be fierce, but it doesn't have to be harsh. And, I think that's what came to my mind about it.
Yeah. As you were talking about overcompensating, I was thinking that with Pisces rising, one of the ways that these people might be overcompensating would be spending too much money.
Yeah. Totally.
Because there is that connection. It's an interesting one. I like that. I think we're done.
Yeah, I think we're wrapping it up. So
Wow.
great.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Jennie. Thank you, those of you who are watching, and we will continue with our videos going forward. Thanks, Jennie.
Thank you. Thanks, Laurie. Bye.